I'm going to show you some of my work today, and before I start, I would like to say at least a couple of words about my background. I guess in terms of my undergrad, I'm a communication designer. Like I went to art school in northern Germany in a small city called Kiel, and majored in typography and new media. And I guess at the time, so the drawing you see here is like an illustration that is probably more than 10 years old at this point. So at the time, like in my late teenage years, just before applying to art school, I really wanted to become an illustrator. And a lot of the works I did at the time had like a similar vibe as this one. And I'm showing you this because drawing is still one of the pillars of my art practice today, even though a lot of the final works that I create rarely involve me drawing anything by hand. I still try to maintain like a fairly disciplined sketching practice. And usually, I mean, sometimes there's breaks, you know, sometimes I don't draw for like 4 weeks because I'm working on like a coding problem that just takes all my time, but usually I try to make at least a couple of drawings in my sketchbook every week. And some of them are more like abstract case studies like this. Other ones are like casual Friday night drawings that look more something like this. And generally speaking, and oftentimes, especially when traveling, I also just draw what's around me. And generally speaking, these sketches are oftentimes the place where like certain ideas, may they be a visual or conceptual, are born. So drawing is like the one side of what I consider like to be like one of the main parts of my artistic practice. The other one is software. So for almost all of my artworks, or I think all of the ones that I'm going to show today, I wrote like custom software in one way or another. And there's usually 2 layers to it. So there's like a higher level layer. So I write a lot of code in a programming language called Lua, which is usually like my high level language of choice to actually generate drawings or actually program the visuals that I want to achieve. And the other one is I write a lot of C++ code as well. So I usually build all of the tools I use from scratch. There really is not, you know, a good reason for that, but it works for me. To me, building my own tools, well, I consider that being part of my art practice and commitment to what I do. But generally speaking, there already are tools for a lot of the things you would want to do. And in general, I feel like software is a good place to be in these days because it's more approachable than ever thanks to internet and open source. And generally speaking, what I like about it a lot is its potential for randomness and surprise. So what does that mean? What are we going to talk about today? Essentially, I'll be talking about instruction-based art and drawing, or to say it differently, instruction-based art through the lens of drawing. And before I talk about my actual work, I'd like to at least do a brief excursion into art history, because I think it helps to kind of like, or I think it makes clearer where I position myself. So I think the first person that at least comes to my mind when I think about the art I do these days is Marcel Duchamp. I think most of the people that are here probably know him, but he was like one of the most influential artists of the last century, which had, well, in my opinion, the main reason for that is that he did so many different things before other people did them. So even though I love Marcel Duchamp, I don't really have like one specific artwork that is my favorite artwork of his. Like, to me, he literally just stands out as a person because of the broad variety of different things he did. But the one thing I wanted to mention is that he was one of the first people that employed like randomness and chance in his art practices. And one of the easy examples for that is his work 3 Standard Stoppages, which he did more than 100 years ago at this point. And in a way it was like a joke about a meter. So he took like a string that was 1 meter long, dropped it from 1 meter height onto a canvas, and then traced the way it fell. Of course, it didn't fall in a straight line, but in like a curvy shape. And then he basically made like these ruler stencils out of it that were kind of like making or undermining the rational approach that units and measurement units specifically usually have. The second thing that I think is very relevant for my work today is Fluxus, which is a network of artists in the 60s and 70s, and it was very interdisciplinary and consisted from composers, poets, designers, painters, etc., etc. But the one thing that stood out or still stands out to me, and that again probably a lot of you already know, is that a lot of the artworks from that period or movement were basically just like these cards of instructions. And generally speaking, for Fluxus artists, usually the process or the performance of a specific set of instructions was like more important than any final work. Like the process and the instructions themselves were kind of like the art piece. This is an example from Mikos Kiyomi, who is a composer. I'm quickly going to read it. Piece for a small puddle. This piece is performed by several performers. Each performer takes position around the puddle. Each stands or squats according to one's own chosen rhythm, looking at the surface of the puddle. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of room in these instructions that will make the final outcome unique every time. So, what's the size of the puddle? Is it a swimming pool or just like a rain puddle? How many performers are there? What is the chosen rhythm, etc. So this kind of open-endedness, I feel like, is still very, or is kind of like what I'm still going for in my practice today. And also, I still love like the humor and weirdness that is encapsulated in a lot of these instructions, which I feel is relevant to my practice as well. And the last historic reference I just briefly want to mention is LeWitt. He's mainly famous for coining conceptual art, I guess, and also a huge representative of minimalism. And one of the most famous works of his are his wall drawings. And this is one instantiation from 2008 at the MoMA. Basically, all these wall drawings exist only as a list of instructions, or I guess he called them certificates. And what is really important to me about his work is that in contrast to Fluxus, where the process and the instructions were really the main important thing, for LeWitt the final outcome was of course also very important, which I feel similar about. So just to give you an idea, this is like for one of his easier wall drawings, what the instructions would look like. Usually they had like a small diagram, as you see on the left, and then some instructions written in human language on the right. And these instructions were usually performed not by computers, but by like a team of artist assistants or people that would install a certain show. Yeah. One thing that I always found interesting too, I don't have any feelings about it, it's just a strange thing to me. Basically, when he would sell these artworks, he would just sell the instructions. And I guess I think the person might have had to then find people to execute them. I'm not sure about that though. Yeah, and I think that's enough about history.